Hello and welcome to the Cloud Computing School YouTube channel. In this how-to video, we will show you how to deploy and configure Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, in the Azure portal. We will deploy an AKS cluster and provide an explanation of all initial cluster creation configuration parameters. This video assumes that you have access to an Azure subscription and that you have global administrator permissions or the minimum required deployment and configuration permissions on all Azure resources involved. Carry out the following steps to deploy an AKS cluster via the Azure portal. Navigate to https://portal.azure.com and log in with global admin user credentials. Create a new resource group called Containers02. On the top left-hand corner, click on Create a Resource. Search for AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service. Click on Create on the corresponding resource icon. This will initiate the Create Kubernetes Cluster wizard in the Azure portal. On the Basics tab, provide the following configuration parameters: Subscription and Resource Group, Cluster Preset Configuration. Each preset configuration constitutes a bundle of configuration settings, each of which covers the most common AKS usage scenarios. You can modify these configurations at any time later on after AKS cluster creation. For the purposes of this demo, we will proceed with the dev/test preset configuration. Kubernetes cluster name. Provide the name CCS AKS Cluster 02. Region. Choose the West Europe region. Availability zones. It should be set to none. AKS pricing tier. This refers to the pricing tier of the AKS control plane option. Choose the free pricing tier. Kubernetes software version. Choose the default. Automatic upgrade option. Choose option enabled with patch. Authentication and authorization. For the purpose of this demo, choose local accounts with Kubernetes RBAC. Click Next to continue to the Node Pools tab. On the Node Pools tab, leave the default system node pool as is and click on Add Node Pool to add a user node pool, worker nodes. On the Add a Node Pool wizard page, provide a node pool name, xnpool02, choose user mode in Ubuntu Linux as OS SKU. Choose None for availability zones, leave the Enable Azure Spot instances unchecked, choose manual scaling and choose a user node size. In the Select a VM size page, click on D2S_V3 image size and click Select. Back on the Add a Node Pool page, set the node count to 2. Leave the rest of the configuration options to default values. Click Add to continue. Back to the Node Pools page, check the Enable Virtual Nodes checkbox and leave the encryption type to default. Click Next to continue. On the Networking tab, check the Enable Private Cluster checkbox. With a private cluster, your API server in the control plane will only be accessible from private IP address space. When enabling a private cluster, setting authorized IP addresses cannot be configured by design, and also the Azure CNI networking mode is required instead of the Kubernetes mode. In the case of a private cluster, a cluster VNet must be assigned, along with a cluster subnet and a virtual node subnet, for the Azure ACI virtual nodes. Also define a CIDR for Kubernetes service address range, and inside this range define a Kubernetes DNS service IP address and a DNS name prefix. A DNS name prefix to use with the hosted Kubernetes API server FQDN is used to connect to the Kubernetes API when managing containers after creating the cluster. Also choose the Calico network policy and click Next. On the Integrations page, the Azure Defender for Cloud, for AKS, should be enabled, and optionally an Azure Container Registry can be assigned or created, to be used for deploying container images to the AKS cluster. Azure Policy can be enabled or disabled. Click Next to continue. On the Monitoring page, you can enable or disable Azure Monitor or configure custom configuration. In addition to the CPU and memory metrics included in AKS by default, you can enable Container Insights for more comprehensive data on the overall performance and health of your cluster. Billing is based on data ingestion and retention settings. Choose the default configuration and click Next. On the Advanced tab, you can choose if you need to enable Secret Store CSI driver and if you need to change the name of the resource group which will hold the AKS cluster control plane resources. Azure recommends using the default name unless it doesn't conform with your company's Azure policies. Click Next to continue to the Tags tab. Click Next to go to the Review and Create tab. On the Review and Create tab, check all deployment parameters and finally click Create. Wait while the AKS cluster deployment is in progress. This process may take up to 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to the Cloud Computing School YouTube channel to be notified of upcoming how-to videos.